Okay, everybody, I think we're going to get started. I'm so excited. I see some familiar names. I see some new folks. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight. My name is Tamara Trigoning. I'm the Development Officer here at Unity Care Northwest. I'm going to stop sharing my screen there for a minute. And welcome to our Building Healthy Relationships event. I hope all of you that signed up for the meal kit pickup are able to get your meal kits today, and that your pizza's in the oven, or that your pastas are waiting for you for after this event. I just wanted to first say that we are, all of us here, the four of us that you see on the screen are from Unity Care Northwest. We are a nonprofit health center here in Whatcom County. We provide medical, dental, behavioral health, and pharmacy services. We believe that all people deserve the opportunity to live their healthiest life. That's our goal, that's our mission, and our vision. If you'd like more information about our work, you can email me. You can go to our website, reach out to us on social media. We love to talk about our work, so please contact us. I'd like to start by welcoming the other folks you see here on the screen, our staff members here at Unity Care Northwest. We have Chris Copedish. She is the director of our Planning and Development Department. Grant Guiley, who's our Behavioral Health Director and Counselor, and Jody Joyce, our CEO. And you'll hear from all of them a little bit later. So we are here to learn about some healthy behaviors and how to have healthy partnerships. And one partnership that I'd really like to highlight is our amazing community partners. So this event and many other events and much of our work is possible because we have such incredible community partners and sponsors. This event was made possible by the CHPW, Community Health Plan of Washington, Tucknet Health Foundation. I see we have some folks from Tucknet Health Foundation on the call. Thanks for joining us. And Peace Health as well. And I see some folks here from Peace Health too. And I certainly need to thank our meal kit partners at Storia Cucina, who are helping us celebrate National Pizza Day a couple days later. It was on Tuesday the 9th. I don't mind celebrating multiple days, but just in case you were curious. So a big thanks to them for partnering with us. Certainly this is a very difficult time for restaurants and for many in our community. So your support tonight helps support us and support them. So thank you so much for being here with us and helping to support multiple organizations in our community. Before we get started, I want to just mention that this is being recorded, so I will send out the link later on. And if you have questions along the way, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A area. If we have time at the end, we will do our best to get to those questions. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Grant Guiley and invite him to start his presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here this evening. So I'm excited about this talk tonight. That you came to hear about building healthy relationships. But I have a particular interest in this because I deal with this arena quite a bit in my profession as a therapist. I talk to individuals a lot on building healthy relationships and their interpersonal effectiveness in one-on-one counseling. But then in other past positions as well, I've done premarital and marital counseling as well. And so I thought as we were dreaming up what might be a good event to talk about here lately, I'm sorry, my scroll is not going forward. Knowing that this year we've learned a lot about relationships, we thought that maybe relationships would be an area where we really want to focus on this year. In the midst of the pandemic over this past year, we have learned a lot about relationships. On one end of the spectrum, we have not been able to have close relationships with those we love, family, friends. We are not able to see them as much. We all hear the stories about people who are stuck in nursing homes, who are struggling with COVID, and their families are not able to visit them, sometimes even when they're on their deathbed, which is just devastating. I know in my own life, this has been a struggle as well. My wife and I, we have a 1.5-year-old and a 4-year-old, but our 1.5-year-old met her grandparents when she was 3 months old. And since then, she's not seen her grandparents, and her grandparents have not been able to see her. And now she's walking and talking and doing all sorts of things. And it's just an interesting phenomenon to know that she hasn't really had much interaction with her grandparents and vice versa. So that's been one aspect this year where relationships have really been put under strain. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we know that a lot of people have been in very close quarters throughout this whole year with the same people over and over again. So on one end of the spectrum, you have people missing close relationships, but then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are in too close of quarters that oftentimes they're coming across conflict and tension within their day-to-day lives, whether it's the people you live with or the people you're working with day in, day out. And without that ability to diversify and get away from some of those people, that can cause lots of tension. So that's why we decided we wanted to really focus on how do we build healthy relationships tonight as the topic of our conversation. And timing wise, we realized it's close to Valentine's Day. Why not? Because Valentine's Day is a day where we often talk about love and celebrate relationships. So we thought it was really good timing. So as we talk about Valentine's Day, again, we talk about the concept of love. And a lot of people love Valentine's Day itself. They really get excited for it. They celebrate it, and they really get geared up for that. We know that the retail stores definitely get geared up for it, but other people really love this holiday. But it's also interesting to notice a phenomenon that's happened over the past decade or so, which is that there's actually been a pendulum swing where a lot of people don't like Valentine's Day. And so when I was looking for a slide related to this, I thought this one was very appropriate, given our sponsor tonight at Storia Cucina, that love disappoints and pizza is eternal. So we find actually that many people love the concept of love and relationships, and other people, they really struggle with this idea of love and relationships. And Valentine's Day just is not their favorite holiday. They actually celebrate anti-Valentine's Day. So what's interesting about this phenomenon, when I think about it, there are really two types of categories of people that really did not like Valentine's Day. The first and most obvious one would be the heartbroken people. These are the people who don't have anyone on Valentine's Day, a day that often wants to focus on people who are paired up. And that one makes sense. That can be a hard day for people. But I think a more important category to note when we talk about Valentine's Day and people who don't like Valentine's Day are the cynics. And, we really don't have to look very far in our culture to realize why people are cynical of the concept of love and romance and Valentine's Day in our culture. Over the years, I did a quick Google study of the top 50 dating shows on TV. I encourage you to do that. You will find some interesting results. But if we look at how love and romance and relationships are predominantly portrayed in our current culture, we realize that it's overly saturated when it comes to the idea of romance and love. And what's happened in our current culture is we have a tendency to reduce or over focus when we talk about relationships on this idea of romance and love. And I think that that's a really important thing, that when we tend to talk about romance, or when we talk about relationships, our fixation is on this idea of love predominantly. We often, we know that there are different types of relationships out there, but that's the one we focus on and we put as the penultimate goal for relationships is the love relationship. But I also think we've reduced the idea of love even more, because when we talk about love in our current culture, oftentimes what we're talking about is attraction. Who are the people that I'm attracted to that really, they give me that visceral sense of excitement? And so that's what we're talking about. And we tend to also reduce relationships down the point of relationships to love, attraction, and then ultimately pairing up. The idea that the main goal, the main focus of relationships is to get love, to feel that attraction, and to pair up with someone else, which I think is really a myth and not really the point of relationships whatsoever. When I was in graduate school, I actually had a professor. He used to say something. He said, "We're not in love with love. We are in love with dopamine." And so for those of you who don't know what dopamine is a neurotransmitter in our brain. It's a chemical in our brain, and it's one of two chemicals that happens in our brain that help us feel the feeling of happiness. And what dopamine does, the first chemical is known as serotonin. That's what helps us feel calm and relaxed and at peace. But dopamine is a chemical in our brain that actually helps us feel excitement and pleasure. And so that's a lot of times when we think of love, we think of attraction, we think of relationships, we're seeking out dopamine. We're not actually seeking out a true relationship. And it's interesting to note that dopamine is the same chemical that's released in our brains when we have sex, when we gamble, when we do drugs, and we do high-risk activities, or we eat really good food. So oftentimes what we're looking for when we're seeking out, when we talk about love and attraction, we're actually talking about dopamine, that chemical, that excitement. And really, again, that's a reductionist view of the idea of relationships and love and what it is we're seeking and the point and why we engage in relationships. And I think that this is a fairly recent phenomenon. If we want to have a better picture of what we're talking about when we talk about love and relationships, an easy place to go to find this is to past civilizations and how they viewed relationships and love. So if we go back, there are lots of different cultures and places that we can go to look for this. But a really good place would be to go to ancient Greece and to look at the philosopher Plato. So Plato did a lot of examining of the idea of love. Now, again, what's different when we talk about love in our current culture, we tend to have that reductionist viewpoint where we just look at it as attraction and who we're going to partner up with. But Plato actually, when he talked about love, he divvied it out into various different categories. And when he used the word love, he wasn't talking about romance. He wasn't talking about attraction. He was talking about every single different type of relationship. So he looked at love and he said, I'm going to parse it out and say, yes, there absolutely is romantic love. That is a type of love. But there is also friendship love. There is love between parents and children, the universal love we have for just our community and things like that. And so really, and so on and so forth, he went in to divide it into many different categories. But the idea is that when Plato talked about love, he was actually talking about relationship. And that's what I want us to focus on tonight. So the whole purpose of this talk, and because I started, I know we talked about Valentine's Day, is I really want to reorient us, to look at our perspective and to understand that in our current culture, I think most people know that there are lots of different types of relationship, but to really reorient us to understand the importance of all different type of relationships and not just focus and fixate on those romantic ones, those ones that we get that really big rush from. And so we're trying to reorient that to help us understand and talk about the depth of different types of relationships, the whole spectrum of relationships. So tonight it would be really easy, or I shouldn't say it would be easy of me. It may be a little misleading to say I'm going to teach you how to build healthy relationships, because that's actually a pretty complex process and concept. And I don't think that there's such a thing as a manual on how to build healthy relationships. But what I would like to do instead is actually look at a few things, some of the ways that we in our culture have looked at relationships, and in my opinion, have gotten off track. Some of the pitfalls I see when people talk about relationships, and help us frame or reframe what good, healthy relationships are like. And so I'm going to be doing that by pointing out certain things, ways we tend to look at relationships, or mistakes we often make, or things that I often see in the counseling field when I come across people who are struggling with relationships. And so this is the general framework, the basic points I want to go over tonight. So first, to start out, I want to talk about why are relationships important? Because again, we're talking about healthy relationships. And it's an interesting thing that I've noticed another phenomenon that's happened over the past couple decades is that there's been this push for a lot of people. Now that there's a proliferation of technology, people are more upwardly mobile. We have a lot of things at our fingertips to get our needs met. There are many people who are reconsidering relationships. And again, this is mostly in the frame of romantic relationships, but oftentimes it's even in just general friend relationships and community as well. We think, I don't need as many people. I have technology. What do I need that for? I can hit a button on my phone, have food delivered to me. I can get on my computer and I can talk to someone that way. Why do I need relationships? And so to really look for this, one of the areas where I get a lot of information from is from research on the study of brain science and relationships. So a good book that if you're into clinical information related to this is this one here called A General Theory of Love. But also if you're not into the more clinical books and more of a layman's book, another one I might recommend to you is Emotional Intelligence. And what these two books have in common is that the main focus of these books is talking about relationships and the brain, how our brain is wired to be in relationship. So I want to start there. Why are relationships important? Why can't we just live isolated, singular lives? But helping us understand, by first helping us understand that to our brain, we are wired to be in relationship. So if you've ever been in any of my talks, or you may have seen this before, I use this slide a lot because I always like to say the brain is very complex, but it can be broken up into three major components. So the first component of our brain is our primitive brain, our hindbrain, also known as our brainstem or basal ganglia. This part of the brain is very, very simple. And its main goal, and the only thing it does, is it's there to keep us alive. Its main focus is helping us survive. And the main thing that it does is to help us feel safe. That's its main concern, is we need to be safe as human beings. So that's the part of the brain that processes that. Are we safe? The next part of our brain, known as our midbrain or our limbic system, that's where we actually house our emotions. That's where our brain processes everything we feel. And I want to distinguish this here because when I talk about our emotions, a lot of times we may come up with a laundry list of different emotions: happy, sad, mad, ambivalent, all these different emotions we can name. But it's not even the concept of the emotion that is housed here, the words and the meaning we put behind those emotions, but this is literally where we viscerally feel things. This is the part of our brain that processes how we feel. And then up at the top of our brain, we have our neocortex, our prefrontal lobe, or our human brain. This is the part of our brain that makes us uniquely human. And this part of our brain is what helps us do complex processing and do these things that are uniquely human to us, including things like making meaning out of things, giving context to whatever it is we're feeling. And so remember when I said, we viscerally feel emotions in our limbic system, this is where we then get the concepts of those emotions. We add those words and we then say, is that a good emotion, a bad emotion? What's the meaning behind that emotion? And in addition to that processing, I have this little cool ducky here because as we create meaning, as we take what we're feeling and we create meaning, that's where we get who we are as people, as individuals. This is where our center of identity comes from, is through the combination of how being safe, feeling, and then making meaning out of that. That's where we get our sense of identity. And so why that's important in understanding why relationships are important is because science has shown that our brains are wired to have us be pack animals. And what I mean by that is in order for us to really grow as human beings, our whole brain has to be functioning together. And what I mean by that is when our brain stem is functioning, again, it's trying to keep us safe. And in order to feel safe, we actually have to be having certain neurochemicals running through. So that limbic system also has to be feeling good. We have to be getting those neurotransmitters, those chemicals that make us feel calm and peaceful and excited rather than scared. So that limbic system is trying to pump out good emotions. And from there, that's where we get meaning making. And when we are calm and happy, blood flow goes to that front part of the brain. That's where we create meaning, we're curious, we discover parts of the world, and we grow in depth and discovery of ourselves as human beings. Now, why that's important, as I said, we are pack animals. We can do some of that calming ourselves. There's the ability for ourselves to calm ourselves down in the midst of things going on in the outside world that might make us feel not so safe. But we are pack animals. Again, we are wired to be pack animals, and our brain functions to be calm when we are connected to other people. So in order to be at our calmest state, by nature, we are supposed to be in relationship. By being in relationship, we are calmer, we are happier, which gives us more blood supply to the front part of our brain to discover and grow and learn and grow in the depth of ourselves. So science and study has shown this over and over and over again. One of my favorite studies on this subject is called the Harvard Happiness Study. You may or may not have heard of this, and this is a very, very unique study of its kind because this is one of the only studies that has actually been able to follow a large group of people throughout their almost whole life. So the Harvard study started way back in the early 1900s, and it took a couple groupings of young boys, one from an affluent community and one from an impoverished community. And it followed them throughout their whole life to see what happened to them. And what they found after looking at all the various variables in these people's lives to see how they ended up, the people who had good, solid relationships, they didn't necessarily fare better. They didn't necessarily become rich or become famous or become more successful. But what they found are the people who, whether they came from the poor background or the wealthy background, and whatever happened to them throughout their life, the people who had good, solid relationships and connections were happier, they were healthier, and they lived longer lives. And so study after study can show this as well, but this is one of the ones that can really, it helps to look at all the different variables that might connect to that and might say a person may be happier, healthier, and live a longer life. But this was one that was able to take out all those variables and point to the fact that healthy relationships are something that when we are in close relationships, they help us be happier, healthier, and live longer lives. So right there, I think the brain science and understanding that helps us understand why relationships are important, because we are wired to be in a relationship and we thrive when we are in relationships, and they help us be better people. All right. So the next thing that I want to talk about is this is often a myth, or this way we go about thinking about relationships. So I talked about, why do we need to be in relationships? There's this sentiment of, maybe relationships are overblown. We don't need to be in them. But talking from the brain science standpoint, we show that they are very important to us. So then people are like, okay, what sort of relationship should I be in? Instead, we tend to fixate on who is that one person in my life, because that's all the energy I want to expend in building these things. So I'm going to look for that one person, that perfect person who's going to meet all my needs, which really is a false notion, because really there's no singular person who can meet all of our needs. My wife doesn't like it when I say this, but I tell her that all the time is, hun, I cannot meet all your needs, and I guarantee you I'm going to fail you at times. She hates when I say that, but like I said, I'm a truth teller, and so I have to tell her those sort of things. One of the other things that goes on, and that she talks about with this, is that the reality is human needs are sometimes paradoxical and at odds with each other. So as humans, we absolutely, as I talked about before, we need to feel comfortable, we need to feel safe, we need to feel secure, we need to have our people that we can go to for all things. But simultaneously, when we are feeling safe, we also need we need adventure, we need excitement, curiosity, trying new things. And these are various parts of our personality. And sometimes when we're looking for one person to meet all those needs, that can cause conflict in our concept of how that person is, and putting a lot of pressure on one person to meet all of our needs. So she keeps coming back to the point that, first off, when we are partnering up, when we are looking for that romantic love, we have to be understanding that that person cannot meet all of our needs. And she also says that we really have to broaden our horizons. So in short, in her book, Mating in Captivity, some of the conclusions are, she always says this when looking for romantic love, is look for the person you can build a life and write a story with, a story that has ups and downs and allows for editing over time. You're not looking for someone who is going to be perfect. And you also have the realization that as you enter into a relationship together, your lives are going to change and things are going to ebb and flow. But she also talks about this idea that, again, instead of fixating on that romantic love, realizing that we need lots of different relationships of various different levels and calibers. So she says, broadening our scope of who we let in ensures we grow as people and have our full needs met. And so that's one of the things, one of the stumbling blocks when it comes to building healthy relationships that I think we can look at is, are we looking for just that one person or for a small number of people to meet all our wide variety of needs? And instead start looking for who are the people, who are the wide net of people who are going to be in our lives to share our lives with us and help us grow. All right. So next, I want to talk about this idea, is that love and relationships are not a contract. Now, I've never met a single person who's gone into a relationship saying, yes, it's a contract. We don't typically do that. When we do partner up, from a legal standpoint, sometimes, yes, there is a contract involved. But for the most part, when we enter in relationship, we don't talk about this. But when I was actually searching for slides, tons of things came up that said something like this, that love is give and take. And oftentimes I even hear this when it comes to friendships and family relationships, when it comes to what's in it for me. This sentiment that we often enter into relationships with this mindset that I need to be getting something, and something very specific, out of this relationship. So when I said love is not a contract, I want to look at that word contract, because that is a legal word that a lawyer might use. And the term contract, what that means is that there are two parties and both of them agree to both give and receive something specific. So for instance, a contract might be between a landlord and a tenant, where one party agrees to give a property or a house or something to that person in exchange for a specific amount of money. And when one of those things is not met, that contract ends. And so a lot of times people enter into relationships, again, not saying it that way, but in their mind and in their heart, oftentimes we feel that way about our relationships. We think, I'm going into this relationship because here's exactly what I need. And now I know in the last section, I did talk about part of a relationship is about getting our needs met, but it's when we put it in that contract concept that in order for this relationship to work and for it to be good and healthy, I have to be getting X from it. That's where it becomes very dangerous. Because again, relationships are dynamic just even when they are a point in time. But our relationships are meant to span time, and we grow as people. And so our needs change over time. And there are going to be different relationships where we get different things out of them. I always like to say, it's not about a contract. Our relationships are not identifying what specifically I'm getting from this person. Because if we go into our relationships saying, I need to get this out of it in order for this to be a good relationship, we're setting ourselves up for failure from the start. I always like to point this out too. I have many, many different relationships. Some are very mutual and give and take. Others, they're not that way whatsoever. And then there are others that they change over time. There are periods where, yes, it is very equal and give and take, but times it switches where I'm getting a whole lot more from a person than I'm giving. And other times where I'm giving a whole lot more than I'm getting. And then I have specific relationships that are that way, that are pretty even, or they kind of stay in that zone. So one relationship I reflect on a lot is I have a mentor. He's my therapist mentor, and he's a really good friend. He's been in the field for about 40 years. Well, I call him quite frequently with needs. And when I reflect on that, I sometimes start to feel bad because I realize, I get so much more out of that relationship than he gets. I'm always calling him with my needs. He is almost never calling me with his needs. That's just not the nature of our relationship. I do recognize he does get something out of our relationship, and he will tell you that if you were to ask him, but it is definitely very lopsided. Similarly, I also am in another relationship, my children, where they get a whole lot more from me than I give to them. So if I were to go into that relationship saying, this is a contract, I need to be getting this much out of our relationship, and if you're not meeting that, I'm sorry, we're done. I just wouldn't be a good parent. So we have to start looking at our relationships, that they're dynamic over time, and that we have to stop looking for what exactly we're getting out of those relationships. Because if that's our main focus when we're looking at relationships, it's just what exactly am I getting out of it? And if I'm not getting that, it's a bad relationship. We're dooming ourselves from the beginning. All right. So this is another one, that love is not a feeling. This is another big myth that I think we have to do away with when we're talking about relationships. And remember, when I say love, I'm not just meaning romantic love. But oftentimes when we talk about relationships, we often talk about, what is that feeling? How is that dopamine rush, that sense of happiness, and how connected do I feel to that person as far as that magnetic pull toward them? We often want to say, those are the relationships I want to be in. And it's when I have that strong sense of that feeling that I think it's a better relationship. And in fact, I would say the spectrum of our relationships probably looks much like this, that the stronger the feeling of goodness, the closer we are to them. That's often how we look at our relationships, that the people I don't feel anything for, those are strangers. People that I have, I kind of know them, but I don't feel a lot for, those are acquaintances. People I have pretty decent feelings for, those are my friends. And then the people I feel really strongly about, those are my partners. But that's not really, I think, again, like I said, I think we need to change that, because love is about so much more than a feeling. Love is actually about intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I don't just mean romantic or physical intimacy. What I mean is the concept of intimacy is about knowing and being known. And that's really the spectrum that we need to look at when it comes to our relationships and building them. The idea of intimacy in relationship, if that's the lens we look at love and relationship through, rather than are we getting good feelings from, really opens up the door to a deep depth of relationship. Because the reality is, what happens when we're in relationship is, as one of my professors used to say, Grant, you are the only person that cannot see your own face. And what he meant by that, he wasn't talking about I didn't have a mirror or a camera to take a picture of me, but that I live in my life and I see myself from a very unique perspective than everyone else in the world. And so by nature, I have a blind spot. I often like to refer to this kind of like the audio recording principle. Everyone knows what it's like to hear yourself on a recording, and you hear that and you think, oh goodness, is that me? Do I really sound like that? And if you were to ask anyone else, they're like, yeah, of course, that's how I hear you every day. The same principle applies to seeing ourselves and who we are as people. We have a major blind spot. Everyone else sees us from a perspective of ourselves that we don't know. And the concept of intimacy, of knowing and being known, is really about opening ourselves up so people can get closer to us and know us more and more. And the closer people get to us, the more we build safety and trust, and they learn more about us. That's when they actually get to reflect back to us deep parts about ourselves that we can't possibly see because of our current perspective, because we can only look from inside looking out. And if we're only looking at good relationships to be happy or feel good, intimacy goes out the window. Because the reality is, when people get close to us and they're able to reflect back to us parts about ourselves that we can't see, oftentimes that's coming back to us in ways that are really hard to hear and hard to swallow, but they are nonetheless good. They're areas where we grow in the depth of our knowledge of who we are. And when it's coming in the package of someone who we know cares about us and is close to us and they want the best for us, we often are more able to trust and hear those things about ourselves that we may not like and that don't feel good. And so if we use intimacy as the measure of love and relationship, rather than am I getting good feelings, that feeling of love or like, instead, how intimate, how close can I be to this person? How much am I letting them in? That is a better measure of relationship, because as we enter into those relationships, not only do we grow in depth of ourselves, but it's reciprocal and mutual. Because as we are known, we get closer to knowing the other person, and we give the gift back to them of helping them grow in their depth of who they are. So as we develop good, close relationships, we become deeper, stronger people. All right, and I see this one a lot in counseling. A lot of people are very conflict avoidant when it comes to their relationships, or they think that, man, this relationship is bad because we're fighting all the time. Now, I know I said earlier on that a very basic part of relationship is we have to have safety, and safety is what helps us feel calm and helps us then develop in ourselves. But the reality is that safety and conflict are absolutely not mutually exclusive. They are not the same thing. The point is as we grow in connection and intimacy to other people, those are the people that it's actually safe to have good, healthy conflict with. By nature, when you're taking one person and another person who are different, even if you have tons of likes together, there's naturally going to be areas where you disagree. But it has to be an environment where it can be safe to have that healthy conflict. But as you grow together, that's a good thing, is that we can't also avoid conflict. When I see couples, when I see people who avoid conflict at all costs, what I see is someone who's missing out on a deep part of their life because they're not going through that editing process, as Esther Perel said, that editing process where we can really hone things and argue. So the point I always like to point out to people is Again, something that Dan Allender said, which is the avoidance of conflict is not the goal. The goal is to fight well in a way that seeks to align and grow in unity. This was some marriage advice that someone gave me as well too. Learn to fight well. My wife and I asked a bunch of people, what's your keys to marriage? And they said, learn to fight well. Don't fight against each other, fight for each other. And sometimes that means having conflict, but knowing that the purpose of entering into conflict is to help grow each other, to support each other, to help see those things in another person, and to grow and learn together and in unity and in intimacy as well. All right. Now, I know I said I didn't have a guidebook on how to build healthy relationships, but I did learn a while back there is a pretty simple formula, but it's a very broad formula that you can apply when it comes to looking to how do I build good, healthy relationships. And it's this: attachment plus boundaries over time. And so I want to break that down a little bit. So the first step in any good relationship is attachment. Are we connected to other people? So the idea of attachment is the idea of being drawn together, connected, and feeling psychologically safe in relationship. By nature, you're not in a relationship if you're not connected, if there's someone you've never met. So the very basic of a relationship is you have to have something that's connecting you, but it doesn't have to be anything majorly significant. It doesn't have to be, you are a romantic partner, but it can even be you go to the same grocery store together, you ride the same bus together, you work in the same building together, something that brings you together. But then in order for that relationship to grow, you have to grow in that sense of psychological safety that draws everyone together. And that sense of safety is then that foundation that everything else is built on. So in that sense of being connected and feeling safe together, that's where you then enter into the next step, which is boundaries. So an important part about relationship is the understanding of this, that which makes us unique, separate, or our own is what boundaries are. The purpose of relationship is not to get into a relationship with someone who's exactly like you, or to get into a relationship with someone and then just like everything they like and discover who you are by just figuring out whatever they like and going with that. The point of relationship, we grow in depth of ourselves, is when we feel safe in that relationship, we feel connected, and then we can actually be ourselves in that relationship. So it's somewhat paradoxical. I need to feel connected, but I also need to feel separate from you. I need to have my own identity in this. And this is where we come together and something magical happens. Because again, I'm accepted, but at the same time, I'm myself and I grow in depth of myself. And as we said, as we grow in intimacy, you know me more, I let you in more, and you let me in more. I learn more and more about my individual self. So part of relationship, again, is growing in the depth of who we are as individuals. And that's the point of it. And we give that back to that other person by reflecting back to them how they are an individual, unique, and we can give that back to them. So we have to hold both in tension sometimes. But those things don't just happen automatically. They take time. Those things grow over time. Like a seed, you can have attachment and boundaries, but it takes time, getting together, spending time together, being with one another for those things to really take root and grow good fruit of relationship. And I always like to say that it's a simple formula that takes lots of work. This is an important thing. I hear a lot of people say when they come into counseling, they say, well, I think I'm just done with this relationship because it's just taking too much work. Relationships shouldn't be this hard. They shouldn't take that much work. And I attribute a lot of that to our instant gratification culture. And I always like to point out this: who in any other venture in life that's been successful did it just come easy to? And we can go to other people who have been successful in other arenas. So I like to point out this: Michael Jordan, when interviewers asked him how he was so successful, he didn't focus on what he did right. He didn't say, I'm just a natural, even though while he's on the court, he very much looks natural. He instead talked about all the things he did wrong and how he kept practicing and going back at it and worked hard and kept getting up when he fell down and missed things. That's how he became a success. Thomas Edison, this is a quote, it's been attributed to many people, but this has often been attributed to him as well too, that I haven't failed, I just found 10,000 ways that won't work. And so when he came up with the incandescent light bulb and alternating current, We have to look at that. So in all these other industries, these people that we look at as these geniuses that are the best, the goats, the greatest of all times at these things, we have to realize they may look easy when they're doing them, but what goes before that is hard work and accepting that they've fallen down and getting back up and trying it again and practicing and working hard at that. And relationships are no exception. I know we want to feel happy in relationship, but for relationships to truly work, they take hard work and going through trials and tribulations and coming back to things to work things out. One of the concepts in psychology that we talk about a lot is this concept called rupture and repair. And what that means is for relationships to really build, we have to have rupture. We have to have disruption and have us have fights. Like I said, conflict is healthy. And as you rupture, it's not about just the rupture, but then how do you come back to repair that relationship, to knit it back together? I always like to say it's like a muscle. When we work out, we feel pain, and that's because our muscle tears. But our muscles grow because they knit back together stronger. And that's essentially what happens when we enter into intimacy, safety, and then eventually conflict, and then repair in relationships, and we work at them. We're ripping ourselves apart to knit ourselves back together stronger. We grow stronger together as a unit, and we grow stronger together in who we are as individuals through that process. So that's the list that I gave you, but I also wanted to give a note on pandemic relationships because this is what's on the top of the mind of a lot of people. We want to build healthy relationships, but how? Especially when we're all having to quarantine, keep distance, and we can't get together in the ways we used to. And so I always like to use this phrase a lot. Good enough is good enough. Things don't have to be perfect. Similarly to where we don't have to have the perfect person, we have to start looking and understanding the purpose of a relationship, why relationships are so important, so healthy. They help us live longer, healthier, happier lives when we are in good, connected relationships, but they're not easy. So in a time like this, when it's hard to be together, we have to understand that yes, we may not be able to get together for Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas or for all these other vacations together or get together like we used to, but we have to get creative with that and realize that sometimes we may not be able to get together, but a phone call is good enough, or a FaceTime using technology is good enough, or getting together where we have to wear masks and distance is good enough. I laugh about this. My wife and I have our practice has been, we have a fire pit in our backyard. We bought a fire pit for the pandemic because we realized it gets cold here. We have this little awning and we started inviting friends over one at a time. Once a week, each of us, we trade off who gets to invite a friend over and we sit with distance, open air, and a fire going to meet with our friends. Last night was my wife's night and her friend showed up in this huge parka that her dad actually summited Mount McKinley in. But that's some of the work that goes into how we build these relationships. We have to get creative and put forth the effort and work to build these healthy relationships, even in difficult times, and realize that it may not be ideal, but good enough is good enough. And it's really important that we put forth the work to continue to build these because it helps the other person, but ultimately it helps grow us. So with that, I just want to review some of these things before we end. Why are relationships important? We are pack animals. We are wired to be together. We live happier, healthier, longer lives when we were wired together because being connected to other people calms us down and grows us in depth of ourselves. Stop looking for the one, the best, or the perfect. We have to understand that it takes a village to meet our needs and that not every relationship is going to be this, dynamite relationship. We often need to look for the people that we can stick with, that they're going to stick around and we can work on these stories that we're building in our lives with. And if we're always looking for the best, we're missing the relationship that's right in front of us. Love and relationships are not contracts. If we go into relationships saying, in order for this to be a good relationship, I have to get this, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So looking at relationships of seeking out what do you get out of that relationship? Because I guarantee you will get something. It may not be what you're expecting. It may not be the most bright, shiny thing, but being in relationship is a good thing. Love is not a feeling. Again, if we're only seeking happiness, dopamine, then we're selling ourselves short. really, love and connection and relationship are about intimacy, which is knowing and being known. So we grow in depth to ourselves and for the other person. Conflict is healthy. This is actually an area when we go through good, healthy conflict that can actually unify and grow us. Good relationships follow that simple that formula of attachment plus boundaries, so connection and being myself over time through hard work. So that's my simple presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I also wish you a happy Valentine's Day this weekend, and I also hope you really enjoyed your pizza tonight. So thank you everyone so much.
Thank you, Grant. That made me think about all different types of things. That idea of conflict making us stronger, or your partner, your people in your life seeing different things about yourself. Grant and I were just chatting yesterday about my partner and I, we do our chores all together and cleaning and all of that. And the other night we were doing all our chores and I finished mine and he finished his. And I said, okay, but we should also do this, 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 and this. And he's like, no, we're done with chores. And I'm like, we should do this. And he's like, you're doing that thing where you look for one more thing to do before you relax. I'm like, that's not a thing I do. And he's like, it's a thing you do. And so that moment of growing as a person and having the courage to be like, ouch, I guess that's a thing I do. So thank you, Grant, for sharing that with us. I am going to pass it over to Jody Joyce, our CEO.
Grant, thank you so much. I think there's a whole nother talk there with that last picture that we saw of the fish. And Grant talked about relationships with people, but I think there's also relationships with things that replenish us, right? And I know that Grant is a fly fisherman, so.
Yeah, this is my pandemic calming tool.
Well, I just wanted to thank each of you for joining us tonight and to make sure that you're aware that Unity Care, in addition to providing medical and dental services, we do provide behavioral health services too. In fact, last year, we provided more than 21,000 behavioral health visits. And most of those were by telehealth because within weeks of the arrival of COVID-19 to Whatcom County, we had moved almost our entire behavioral health service to a telehealth platform. We offer traditional counseling and psychiatric services. We offer case management to help individuals in our community access the resources that they need. We also offer support and wellness groups and supportive services around pain management and nutrition and yoga. So, you know, I want to acknowledge to each of you joining us tonight that it is the support from our community that helps make this work possible. And Tamara is putting a donation link into the chat tonight. We know that you support us in many ways, and if this is something that you'd like to, then it certainly allows us to extend our reach to individuals in our community. You know, Unity Care exists to provide health and wellness in our community, and it is each of you and the other people in this community, not only that we serve, but that we partner with and are working to help support. Thank you for your interest and your support in our organization. Thank you for all of the ways that you are reaching out to those in need in our community, particularly over this past year that has been like no other. And I just want to thank you again for your time, for your support, and for your partnership as we are continuing to work toward ensuring that each person in this community can live their best and healthiest life. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.